About 10 years ago, around the age of 20, I used to play Warhammer 2nd Edition with some friends in person. We had done a few campaigns together and things were generally fine. At one point, we started a new campaign. It wasn't official, so I'm not sure what the campaign itself was about since we never got that far into it. It involved playing as a couple of merchants and their bodyguards. That's pretty much all I remember. Another player approached me with an idea that she had, which was to essentially play as married merchants. That seemed fine with me, and we okayed it with the game master. I remember the first few sessions as uneventful. However, soon, she started messaging me in private, outside of the table, asking to do some role-playing to get into the headspace of our characters. Nothing wrong with that, so I said sure. Turns out she wanted to do some nighttime role-playing. I was a little weirded out, but being 20 and not very assertive, I played along once or twice. I was very uncomfortable the entire time. There were some advances in person as well, including literally telling me she wanted to do it, but I did not bite. Soon afterwards, I moved away, and as far as I know, the group split up. You want to know the worst part? The GM was her husband, who was the brother of my fairly recent ex-girlfriend, who also played at the table. Turns out they had an open relationship kind of deal and decided to make the campaign to rope me into that. Whoa! That escalated very, very quickly. Yeah, I don't really have much else to say about this. The whole uncomfortable advances is one thing, but the whole group dynamic being that messy is a whole other thing. This is a story about my first GM and a group of players realizing far too slowly that he was toxic. As a GM, he had his strengths. His descriptions were vivid. He had a strong understanding of mechanics and was quick on his feet with both rulings and role-playing. If you engaged with him during character creation, he would include specific hooks for your character. Every game he ran would start full of promise, but then problems would start. His favorite thing to do was put us in moral dilemmas. We would find ourselves forced to let bad things happen or TPK. Okay, this would have been interesting roleplay, except that it happened constantly, and he made a habit of smugly shaming us out of game whenever we chose to, live. If an NPC died in the woods because we chose to rest before searching for them, it wasn't played as a tragic circumstance. It meant we, as players, were bad people. Eventually, he would get bored with the current campaign and use these situations to either TPK the party or make the game so miserable that we would jump on the idea of starting a new one. This pattern repeated for a long time. However, I'm going to focus on the campaign, which was our final straw. A few things set this campaign up to be our breaking point. First, we were getting older and finally maturing out of the accept friendships in any form mindset. Second, the GM decided that this would be a Mutants and Masterminds campaign, as Pathfinder 1st Edition was too imbalanced. Having now run a lot of Pathfinder 1st Edition, I don't necessarily disagree, but the system switch seemed directly related to our Game Master's growing frustration that we were starting to survive fights he did not want us to. Changing to a system we didn't know well swung the TPK power back into his hands. The new campaign setting was a dystopian version of our hometown. The problem started when we met the main antagonist, a mysterious individual known as Game Master. We were introduced to him when he forced us to play a game of human chess with mind-controlled children. We played the game believing they would be killed otherwise. During the game, we did everything we could to use non-lethal attacks and ultimately lost since we were desperately trying to avoid hurting anyone. After that match, the GM delivered a smug in-character lecture about how our willingness to participate in such an evil game meant that we could not be trusted. He, on the other hand, knew the children were only illusions and therefore had done nothing wrong. This would have been less disturbing if the GM wasn't so clear that this was his IRL interpretation of the situation. Our next encounter with GM was when things really went off the rails. He offered a huge sum of money to any player character who could kill the rest of the player characters. In real life, the Game Master was egging on a specific player, playing a mercenary in dire need of money. The player took the bait, and by the end of the fight, my player character was the only survivor. To his defense, the player in question felt awful afterwards. The game master had convinced him that this was going to be a cool roleplay moment, but then immediately threw him under the bus when the rest of us were upset. Not long after, this player stepped away from the game due to a falling out with the game master. We continued for a little while, with one of the players making a new character and us going on a convoluted mission to save the soul of the other. But that just led to weeks of a player not being able to participate. GM had overplayed his hand. Even though he wasn't bored yet, we were already miserable and not wanting to continue. He proposed a soft reboot of the game with new characters. Things got weird again in the reboot since the GM started introducing the new villains, super-powered avatars of us in real life. My avatar wasn't too bad, perhaps only because we didn't play long enough for her to actually show up, though rumors we heard that she was a mafia-esque casino owner, which was a nod to the game nights I sometimes had at my house. What kind of game nights are you running? Oh my god. The second player's villainous avatar was a mad bomber, which was a reference to the alchemist he played in our last campaign. This wasn't too insulting to the player, but was really annoying in-game. The GM constantly used him to disrupt any progress we made with, "But wait! The mad bomber has a building full of hostages and will explode them all if you don't go save them immediately." The third player is where things start to get insulting. She was the shyest player and the GM would often bully her for it. He would frequently force her into high consequence roleplay situations, knowing she got anxious when put on the spot. Her avatar was borderline feral and non-verbal. She lived in the graveyard and would violently run down anyone who came there with her car. Aside from being mean-spirited, it was a bizarre representation of someone who is honestly one of the nicest people you could hope to meet. However, this portrayal was kind compared to the avatar for the former Mercenaries player. GM did not like their falling out well and channeled his resentment into this portrayal of the character. His avatar was a disgusting, fat, stupid, murderous wrestler who lived in his parents' basement and had no friends. I have a lot of regrets for the things I tolerated in GM's games, but not calling him out for this petty bullying is my biggest one. Me and the shy player did reach out to the player to befriend him outside the game. Prior to that, we had mainly known him through the GM, but looking back, I wish I had shut GM down for this. After a few weeks, they reconciled and the player returned, playing as a sniper with weakness to mind control. His avatar thankfully became less offensive after that. Then, GM brought in another player. This player had a history of being a bit of a that guy. His character was a mind controller, and his weakness was that he didn't know he had powers. He constantly used this as an excuse, with the Game Master's support, to accidentally use his powers against us, especially the sniper. His character would also try to pry info from us and generally acted suspicious. We had no in-game reason to trust him, and were tolerating him for the metagame only. Then came the session that broke us. We had foolishly split up to investigate. Sniper and Shy Player were together when Sniper received a note that the Mad Bomber was holding a building full of people hostage. Again, he was told to go there immediately or else they would be killed. He decided to take the heroic route and go. Shy Player insisted on helping. This noticeably annoyed the Game Master, but he couldn't come up with a reason why she wouldn't be able to follow. When they arrived, they were ambushed by the Mad Bomber and the Wrestler avatar. This was an unwinnable fight, as our full party could barely handle them individually. However, both players decided to stand their ground, save as many people as they could, and die as heroes. Just as things were looking dire, a helicopter showed up and started gunning down the avatars. For a brief moment, we thought this was the GM's way of saving them, but then they just turned their guns on the player characters, killing them both. By this point, we were all in what the hell mode. GM revealed that the mind controller had betrayed us. Shocking, I know. He was working for my avatar and had forged a plan with the Game Master to kill the sniper because they had argued over the accidental mind control. Shy Player's character wasn't supposed to be there. Sniper was pissed and made it clear he would not be building a replacement character. Shy Player was quieter but visibly upset. It felt like the culmination of all our frustrations, an impossible choice, an unwinnable fight, a player being egged on by the GM to betray the party, plus the attack on Sniper felt pretty targeted given their recent dispute. After that, the GM stepped down, and Sniper ran the game for a while. Our former Game Master didn't do well not having full control, especially when his attempts to convince everyone that Sniper was doing a terrible job being the DM fell on deaf ears. He eventually dropped out of the game and drifted from the friend group. We expanded our gaming circle, and after playing a little while with another problem GM, who probably deserves his own horror story, I started running games. Since then, Sniper has sworn off of PvP, Shy Player is not so shy now that she can roleplay without being humiliated, and I've been happily GMing ever since. Honestly, congratulations to this group for making it through that. This Game Master, well, they suck. They really, really suck. Now, first and foremost, I need to tell you guys, the good old mantra of no D&D is better than bad D&D, and that applies to games that aren't D&D, which is what these people are playing. Look, no matter what, spending a lot of time with somebody who makes you miserable is not a good idea. No matter how good of a game master they are, if they have problem behavior like this, it's not worth playing, even if they're good at traditional game master things, like improving stories and coming up with cool NPCs. Look, that's great, that's awesome. But if they're bad at being a good person, it's never, ever worth it. Hostile GMing like this is just entirely a slog to play through. When you're playing with somebody like this, every decision feels contrived because the GM actively wants you to lose. Combine that with moral lecturing, encouragement of PvP, and generally just being a dick to somebody who's just shy, you've got a recipe for a game master nobody should want to play with. From Black Redacted. Can I ask you a question about the rules? From Red Redacted. Yeah, ask away. Alright, I was just wondering why I keep rolling charisma checks to pick locks rather than dexterity. Is there a reason why charisma is used for lockpicking in your game? Well, in simple terms, the act of using lockpicks is generally just rolling a d20 and adding your proficiency bonus to it, as there is no actual check, so I make it a performance check for the aesthetic of performing diligent work, either under pressure or in silence, as it feels the most appropriate. Otherwise, I would simply have you roll a d20 plus proficiency, and that takes away from the fun and immersion in my opinion. Would you rather just roll a d20? We can do that if so. Well, I mean, performance is used for stuff like singing a song or telling a story. Plus, there is a check for picking a lock in the rules. It's Thieves' Tools plus Dexterity plus Proficiency. That's the whole point of Thieves' Tools. Here's a link to Roll20. You do not add dexterity in any fashion, unfortunately. And in any case, performance is used in many aspects besides song and dance, like I mentioned earlier. If you would prefer, I can just have you roll a d20 plus proficiency only to pick locks from now on if that's simpler for you. Dude, page 120 of the DM's guide. You might call for an intelligence investigation check for a character to deduce what needs to be done, followed by a dexterity check using Thieves' Tools to perform the necessary sabotage. That is for traps, not for locks? Dude, either way, I don't understand how charisma is for lock picking. Am I trying to persuade the lock to unlock? Shouldn't I need to be dexterous in order to pick the lock? Also, what about gloves of thievery? Why do they mention dexterity checks to unlock locks if those don't exist? It says nothing of charisma either. No, you're not trying to persuade a lock. You're putting confidence in yourself that you know what you're doing, and you have nothing to worry about. Otherwise, being dexterous doesn't help if you don't have the confidence to back up your capabilities. That would be like saying, I want to cast Fireball without ever having learned the spell, but I have the knowledge and knowing it is a spell, so I should be able to just do it. If you want to get down to the nitty-gritty of it, yes. We will never find out what that yes refers to because, you know, that's where the conversation ends, unfortunately. Look, guys, by this DM's logic, charisma should be used for every single skill check because you need to give yourself confidence in everything, essentially, which is why, no, dexterity is used for lockpicking and charisma is used for other things. Now, I understand. Every DM has their homebrew rules. I got a whole page of patch notes for a reason in my games. However, you need to clarify that they are homebrew rules. Don't gaslight your players into thinking it's rules as written. And also, you need to listen to feedback about those rules. I give my players the patch notes as early as I can so that they understand what they're getting into and so they can give me any feedback on whatever rules I've implemented into my silly little games. This DM picked a weird hill to die on, and I will never understand it. Like most here, I've had a fair few horror stories as a player, but this one is my only major one as a game master. It's not nearly as dramatic or twisted as some stories on here, but the behavior was insidious and targeted my values as a person. I'm running 5th edition for 3 dudes and this problem player, a lady. I'm male, and most of my RPG groups are quite gender diverse, usually 50-50 across genders with 25 years of playing. As things get bad between us, she often made gender an issue, essentially accusing me of handling the rules differently for her because she was the only woman in the group, which is why I'm mentioning it here. I actually had a female friend come guest an NPC one time just to make sure I wasn't in fact being sexist. The guest said I was fine, but problem player was just intolerable. Before I go further, bear in mind this woman was around 40 at the time, and an experienced TTRPG player, so we're not talking about someone new to D&D or too young to know any better. Before we all meet up for the campaign for the first time, I ask her what the best method of communication is for her, and she says it's email, not social media. Cool, no problem. So ahead of session 0, I sent out via email, as she requested, some things about the campaign premise and a link to my house rules document, which is about 2 pages and very thoroughly tested. Turns out, she never read it, so when I started enforcing my house rules, she flipped out on me. Similar things happen whenever I enforced any rules that aren't the most well-known. For example, if the party travels more than 8 hours in a day, they have to start making con checks for exhaustion. That is not one of my house rules, it's just how the game works. When I brought that up one time, problem player acted like I'd smacked her in the face. Even more basic things became a source of tension, resentment, and accusation. The way I handle skill rolls is I always say the DC out loud, as well as both the consequences of success and failure. I run 5e like it was an indie RPG essentially. It's maximum transparency all the way, but anytime problem player failed a roll, she'd lose it. Hell, even basic attack roll failures were met with dramatic sighs and groans. In fact, I'll go further, she seemed positively triggered anytime anything bad happened to her player character, no matter how it had been set up. Whenever we tried to communicate about it out of game, like between sessions, we even met up for lunch one time just to talk about this stuff, she assured me she didn't want to quit the game, but that she felt targeted by my GMing. I don't remember exactly how I responded, but I think I tried to be reassuring, and I don't know what that means. Anodyne, not likely to provoke offense or dissent. Okay. The more you know. The accusations and recriminations had me feeling awful by the end of every session. I came very close to just kicking her out, which I should have done way back at the beginning, in hindsight, as in so many stories on the sub. It was just such a strange source of unhappiness and criticism since it wasn't based in reality that I didn't know how to deal with it at the time. She eventually left the campaign when I went away for about a month, and when I came back, I was able to finish the campaign with the other 3 players. This whole experience with problem player, though, was just an incredible abuse of my efforts to be inclusive while also providing a challenge in D&D, so that's why it stayed with me for a number of years now. Thanks for reading. I, like many others, encourage DMs and frankly people in general to embrace feedback and criticism to try and learn from it, etc, etc, etc. However, it's also important to keep in mind that feedback and criticism comes from people, which means it can just be bad sometimes. And here, we don't just see it being bad, we see it being used in a manipulative way. There is a balance. Not every single piece of criticism you receive is going to be helpful or hell, even true. We see a person here that's just straight up lying. But of course, it's hard to judge that yourself as you're sort of a biased party, which is why I always try and bring in other people into the discussion, especially people from outside the group who are familiar with D&D and the social environment it presents. It's helpful to just get another set of eyes on the issue that exists beyond the group. As long as you're not just using it as an opportunity to badmouth somebody unproductively, I think it's a great thing to get some outside perspective to learn how to better improve the situation and learn if this criticism is actually worth listening to in the first place. With this criticism here serving as a great example of what not to listen for. My friend Dominic started a new campaign for a group of us to play after his last campaigns fizzled out. There were 5 of us. Dom, DMing, me, Alex, and a guy called Lucas are joining from our main group. One player went to school with us, and the final player, Eric, we met online a few months before and lives in a time zone with a 5-hour difference. Some background on the campaign. We're adventurers in training. Basically, we're a group of young, inexperienced adventurers in an urban fantasy environment. It's a homebrew world, kind of like the Will Smith movie Bright, but with D&D lore. It was not very well thought out. We all met in a small, cheap tavern run by a kind woman, Lucy. We start at level 1. At the beginning of session 0, Dominic mentions a few things. Number 1, actions have consequences. Number 2, He's cool with unique builds as long as it comes from the official books. Number 3, he wants creativity to be used in solutions. And number 4, he's not super set on a canon. Most things we say within reason are accepted. Arc 1 comes around with Session 1. We're investigating a kidnapping. We enter an apartment to look for clues and find ourselves face to face with a buff orc, stronger than the base orc enemy, weaker than a chieftain, and he only attacks my character. I get maybe 8 damage on him before I'm downed in one hit. I started with like 9 or 10 hit points. A player heals me up, back up halfway. Dom decides to hit me again. Critical. We play with brutal criticals, and it's more than twice my max HP. I'm dead. No saving throw. I'm just dead. My skull is literally chopped to bits. I'm revived by my patron. I'm a sorcerer mechanically, but I'm flavored as a warlock with a patron. And my character is now a completely different homebrewed subclass. It involved roleplay to unlock 90% of its abilities. I'll go into more details in the comments if anyone shows interest. My character is permanently mangled and scarred too. If I go against my patron, I will have this revival taken away from me. This is the first session. I'm level 1. It would have been less frustrating if anybody else had gotten hit at any point during the fight. It felt like I was just being targeted. It gets worse. We continue. Eventually, due to our inaction at a crucial point, a ritual goes off, sending swarms of CR6 demons into the streets. We save the kidnapped victim from death, thankfully. The party is separated. 2 of us are cornered while trying to save a civilian family from 2 to 3 demons, and 20 plus demons roam the ritual hall where the rest of the party hides, unable to, do anything. The 2 of us are downed, of course, and out comes Lucy, the kind older woman NPC I mentioned earlier. She took care of the demons off screen in a few in-game minutes. All of them. She heals us all up and we fade to black. Okay, fair enough. We deliberated too long. Actions have consequences, whatever. But that's not where this mess of a campaign ends. We're tricked into a house full of devils, basically forced to act on their evil game show against other groups of tricked participants. One of the trials is jumping into lava. We'll get 1 point per person that has jumped in or touched the lava. It's at the bottom of a little cliff. Eric is playing a chronomancy wizard, basically all utility and no combat. He casts his spells using a can of spray paint. It was actually a really cool concept. Anyway, he wants to jump off the side and halfway down use a levitation spell to touch the lava without submerging himself. The DM Dom says the spell doesn't work like that. They spend 45 minutes of our 2-hour session arguing over the physics and real-world application of the spell. Someone has like 3 tabs of rules on spells open. Someone's doing math to calculate velocity and g-force or something. I don't think I said anything during this. This happened a few times. That spell doesn't work like that in my world. Rulings like this would just come up on the spot and maybe change later. After we'd written the spells on our character sheets, I don't like that, was uttered a lot by Dom concerning mechanics and lore bits. Anytime Eric used any of his class abilities, he's just shut down. Every spell is argued, nerfed, and rules lawyered down to every comma. The DM Dom didn't like rerolls during non-combat situations, and he didn't share this when Eric showed him his chronomancy character, even though that was 90% of the point of his character. Eric is angrily messaging me during this, revealing he only brought up physics because of previous nerfs to the character that I wasn't aware of. It's basically revealed to be a vat of fake acid from Rick and Morty. Dom is actually a little annoyed. None of us jumped in and we were taking so long beforehand. But like he said, actions have consequences, deadly ones, so nobody was willing to take the jump into lava. Before then, we win, and the lords of the house open a portal. We go through, and it sends us to the homeland of some other participants that the devils had expected to win. Arc 3, we're sent to a dictatorship in a continent across the ocean from home. We turn and see that Eric's character is no longer a chronomancy wizard, but a ditzy female druid who wandered into a portal. Wizard stayed behind? DM Dom gave Eric 2 options: change his wizard or completely remake a character about 6 sessions in. He chose just to make a new one, not wanting to do the wizard injustice. A small encounter happens. Former chronomancy wizard Eric is spiteful, arguing every single bit of a rule he can to take down our enemies. He has gone full rules lawyer in his spells and the enemy's abilities. The vibe is tense, full of spite. We get a call from Lucy, again, long story short. She tells us to break into the base of the bad guys to try and stop some experimentation that we witnessed going on a few minutes after being there. Something about saving kids from mind control before it's too late. It's the only plot hook we've been given other than literally just wandering around the woods near a town. We sneak and lie and fight our way through soldiers through different levels of their base. We make our way to the top. There are monsters in cages set loose to kill us, guards with guns and swords, and a DM out to get us. The way the encounter was set up, it was deadly. We're all downed in a few rounds of combat, and Alex is downed and killed. Guess who comes to save us? Again. With her god powers, Lucy has traveled thousands of miles in a few hours, miraculously found this secret base, and slaughtered hundreds of soldiers off screen. We hear her booming voice coming from outside, thousands of times louder than normal, as she gives an impassioned speech. She whisks Alex's body away, and he comes back completely fine, alive. We have just killed maybe like 12 guards. We didn't even save any children from experimentation. Everyone in the call is just sort of left confused and frustrated as to what the point was. Look, I understand wanting to make us feel helpless in a dangerous world, but our characters are being sent out by Lucy, who I can only assume is literally a god, to do things she can do instantly, and we didn't have much of a choice in our actions here. We didn't hesitate like before, but we were concise and smart with our plans. I just assumed it's what he had planned the entire time. Dominic, the DM, ends the session and admits he has no idea where to go from here. He leaves the call. The rest of us in the call sit in silence for a while. Lucas, who is an absolute god of a DM himself, I might add, lets slide that this isn't the first time a campaign of DOMs has had a god DMPC that saves the party after they all fall to a way too hard encounter. It's the third. I mean, at least Lucy didn't call us stupid, he adds, and leaves the call. Some of the best D&D I have ever played with anyone has been with this group. They're my friends. Dominic is the type of person to drive you 4 hours to the airport in the dark. He's gotten me through some tough times, but between his crappy D&D and some personal stuff, it can be hard to spend time with him sometimes, and I have some trouble vocalizing my issues with him because nothing actively problematic is happening. I'm overwhelmed. TLDR, DM kills my session. Wait, no. I mean, he did that too, but... Sorry. DM kills my character in first session, has God DMPC save everyone from 2/3 of our story arcs, and overhauls 2 players' characters. Now look, you guys probably already know that I am a big fan of super intense, hard encounters, but at the end of the day, they still need to be possible, and most importantly, using a DMPC to save the party all the time, especially during climactic moments, it can get kind of irritating. Your NPCs are not heroes. Your player characters are. Your NPCs can help, but the main characters are always going to be the PCs. We've said this multiple times. This is the problem with a lot of these problem DMPCs. They steal the spotlight from the player characters and make them feel kind of useless. Nothing you haven't heard before, but the more interesting question is how or whether or not the OP even should separate from this DM, because clearly there are some issues here. Now, of course, this is up to the OP. I can't make that decision for them. Honestly, moving on from a friendship like this is really difficult sometimes. I mean, a lot of people think romantic partners are the only time you can have a really big breakup, but friends can absolutely have a breakup too, and sometimes it can be even more complicated. For me, I've always found that simply walking away and not engaging with this person anymore is the healthiest way I could do it. Though, of course, that is me. That's not going to work on everyone and in every friendship. I wish the OP the best of luck in their future campaigns and hope they avoid any airship-style DMPCs in the future. Alright, and that's going to be it for today's episode of RPG Horror Stories. If you guys enjoyed, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more of my content, then you can check out our Tavern Adjacent podcast. We just had Bob Worldbuilder on the show. It was a great episode, and you can check it out in the cards. And while you're there, subscribe to Crispy's Tavern to get more of our content right as it comes out. And finally, if you want to leave your own stories or thoughts, go down to the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment God NPC to let me know you made it to the end of the video. And that's all. Comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.